All right. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining today's web seminar. We are going to get started in just a minute. People are getting joined right now, so we'll give people another minute and then we'll get started. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We're just dealing with one tech final little challenge here, and then we'll get started. All right, I think we're ready to go here. So thanks everyone for joining us. Welcome to today's call. This is Simone Turek-Lee with John Burton Advocates for Youth. And today we'll be discussing Homekey, familiarizing people with the program, touching on how providers can prepare for the forthcoming NOFA. So before we jump in, I just want to share this technical information with you. I'm sure by now we're all pretty familiar with Zoom webinar. To be honest, we have just switched over from using GoToWebinar, so I feel like I'm still learning a little bit, but I'm sure all of you are well versed on it. Please use the Q&A panel on the control panel, the Q&A window, to submit questions. We aren't using a chat box right now, so please do submit the questions through the Q&A function. And we always record our webinars and our Zoom calls and post them on our website in the resource library. We'll also send that information out to you later this afternoon. So we'll get started just with a background on Homekey, an overview. We'll talk about the funding levels and the youth set aside, which is why we're all here today and we're very excited about. We will talk about a specific project that was funded last year, serving youth, and we have some special guests joining us today to do that. And then actions that you as homeless youth providers can take now. And then we'll just touch on a couple additional funding opportunities if there's time, and we'll go into our Q&A session. So I'm joined today by three J-Bay staff first. So we are joined by Amy Lemley, who is our Executive Director here at John Burton Advocates for Youth. I'm also joined by my colleague, Anna Johnson, who is Senior Project Manager. And then again, I'm Simone Turek-Lee, the Director of Housing and Health here at J-Bay. We're also joined by two guests from a Homekey project funded last year in Riverside County. We'll be hearing from Gabriel Maldonado, the CEO of True Evolution, and Michael Walsh, the Deputy Director at the Housing Authority of the County of Riverside. So, why Homekey? Why now? There are really four main reasons. You see them there on the slide. First, there is a historic level of funding available for the 2021 and 22 and 22-23 fiscal years. In total, it's a $2.75 billion investment. As you'll learn, this is funding that's essentially for capital. So we've never before seeing this level of investment by our state and capital for addressing the homelessness crisis. So this is, I think it's safe to say this is quite possibly a once in a lifetime opportunity. And we want to make sure that as youth homelessness providers and the youth community that we snag some of this. Secondly, and possibly most important, this is a historic investment in youth. So as you'll hear from Anna shortly, last year there were very few Homekey project applications submitted and funded that specified youth as a service population. And so very few Homekey dollars went to serving youth. And this is the reason we've been advocating this past budget cycle for a youth set aside in Homekey. And we're thrilled that the governor and legislature saw the value in a youth set aside, saw the success of it in previous state funded programs in recent years, and really prioritized this in the state budget. So we certainly thank them for that and everyone who is involved in those efforts. And that includes a lot of you. We know that, many of you signed on to support requesting a youth set aside in Homekey, and that advocacy certainly, we thank you for that. And that advocacy certainly contributed to where we are now, which is that the Homekey investment includes an 8% youth set aside, and that equals to $220 million over the next 2 years available to projects that include youth. The third reason is, this is a unique opportunity. It's grant funding for capital. It's not tax credits funding. And grant funding provides a lot more flexibility. You have more control over who you serve, how you serve them. And then lastly, this is an opportunity, if you so choose to try to use this, this opportunity to become an owner, a building owner, it's an opportunity to build capacity in your organization. Not all of Homekey's eligible uses are necessarily about owning, or the way that you might structure your project. You might not be an owner, but it's certainly an opportunity if it's something that you've considered and you're ready for. So let's talk a little bit about kind of high-level background overview of the program. So Homekey was established last year in the midst of the pandemic to protect Californians experiencing homelessness who are at high risk for serious illness and impacted by COVID-19. The program provides funding to purchase, build, and rehabilitate housing and convert it into interim or permanent long-term housing. And we'll get more into those specific eligible uses shortly. The program is administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development. And we created a fact sheet that provides information on both Homekey and another program. So if you refer to page 1 of that fact sheet, you'll get kind of a lot of the information we're sharing today from that fact sheet. And Homekey was authorized this year in AB 140, and that's the budget trailer bill that really focuses on housing. So who are the eligible applicants? So Homekey is a program that you as a nonprofit organization, if you are in fact a nonprofit service provider, cannot apply for directly. This is a program where the eligible applicants are public entities, and that includes most commonly, cities, counties, and public housing authorities. However, these projects usually involve, partners, and so co-applicants are permitted on the project. And examples of co-applicants last year were housing developers, service providers, and other public entities. And then quite importantly, you can also be a non-co-applicant partner. So we want to draw attention to that. That's probably a pretty common role for a nonprofit service provider. And, you don't have to be named on the application to be, or be a co-applicant partner to be a partner on the project, and that's important to know. Jurisdictions will only be awarded if they apply. So maybe that seems maybe quite obvious, but jurisdictions, this is not a formula funded allocation where every county gets some money, or where every city gets some money, or every continuum of care gets money. It's not like HAP, if you're familiar with that. This is there's $1.45 billion available this year. Come and get it. You have to apply for it. Last year, not all jurisdictions applied for Homekey. So, for example, and I'm not trying to pick on this jurisdiction, but we have it up there because there are high levels of youth homelessness in that jurisdiction, and they didn't apply for Homekey, but Santa Cruz, for example. We were surprised to see that Santa Cruz didn't have any Homekey funding, and Michael's laughing. Maybe he knows the backstory on that. But you know, we know that Santa Cruz has a high level of youth homelessness, and we know that we think it would be of great value for maybe a funded Homekey project in Santa Cruz. So it's just an example of you have to apply to get the funding. Not every jurisdiction is going to get it. And on the flip side, several jurisdictions had multiple projects funded. So for example, LA City alone had at least 10 projects funded. And when you kind of combine that with LA County, I think it was 20 something. So there's not just a one project per jurisdiction situation. You can put forth many projects for application for funding. And then lastly, applicants have to respond to a NOFA. So like I said, not a formula funded grant. This is technically a competitive grant, but we do want to point out in 2020, all project applications were funded. So then we're turned away. And we don't know what it's going to look like this year. It could be very different, but we do know that there is a lot of money available. So this is not a situation of super scarce resources. We think that there appears to be, you know, room at the table. So Homekey eligible uses. So I'm not going to read all of these because you can all see them on the screen, but you know, if you're familiar with Homekey from last year, you probably know it was mainly a kind of hotel motel acquisition and conversion use was most common. But that's certainly not what it's limited to. It's capital for other sites and assets. It's also, you know, master leasing for non-congregate housing. And you can see the other kind of several uses on the screen there. And again, we will send out this PowerPoint. And this is also, you know, in statute for what the eligible uses are. So this is another thing that's in statute. You know, we tried to not put a bunch of information from last year's NOFA in here because that can change. The NOFA this year will look different than last year. There will be probably some similarities, and there'll be some differences. So, but this is something here on the screen, again, that's in statute. Considerations for fund allocation. So where possible, fund allocation will take the factors on the screen into consideration. So you see things like geographic need, you know, demonstrated ability of the applicant to fund ongoing operating reserves. There's a list of things there that they're kind of looking to take into consideration for projects that are applying. And they'll have a way of prioritizing that'll be spelled out in the NOFA. Also important to know, Homekey operates on a tight timeline. Very important thing to note. HCD will issue a NOFA within 3 months of the funds being appropriated in the state budget. And you know, that means we're looking essentially at next month, September, for this NOFA to be released. It could be very soon. It could be a few weeks. That's, you know, up to how quickly HCD is pulling together all of the program guidance for this year, which is certainly a tall order. And then each award must be expended within 8 months of the date of award, unless granted an extension from HCD. So now I'm going to pass it over to Anna to talk briefly about the funding levels for the next 2 years, and then about the youth set aside specifically, and then we will hear from our special guest.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Simone. So as Simone noted earlier, due to the advocacy efforts of many organizations and people across California, the governor, the legislature, youth experiencing homelessness, youth serving organizations, calling in, writing letters, and just asking for assistance during the pandemic, there is this opportunity to serve youth through Homekey with that 8% youth set aside of funds Simone mentioned. So here's a summary of this year's budget, which includes $220 million available this year and next. So kind of split 116 million this year, 104 million for projects next year that are serving youth as an eligible service population. This is an exciting opportunity to create more units of housing, apartments for youth, and for new partnerships between applicants, developers, and youth service organizations to provide the services and linkages. So again, $2.75 billion. And because of that tight timeline Simone just mentioned, if you start working with partners this year, and the timeline's too quick, there's again always next year. So look at this, see what's available as an opportunity now, and also know that anything you do now to kind of pave this path forward could also benefit next year. So you know, do what's reasonable for you. There's this opportunity this year and next. Next slide. Just a summary of last year's Homekey project. There was $846 million funded under that quick timeline to acquire and rehabilitate buildings and properties to create non-congregate shelter due to the pandemic and the risk of contracting and spreading COVID. And the ultimate goal was to create permanent supportive housing units that can be used ongoing for multiple years. So when we looked at the press releases, project awards, and the eligible uses of the funds, we noticed that there were 94 funded projects, with just 2 explicitly naming youth experiencing homelessness as a main service population. These 2 projects represented 0.6% of the total Homekey funding, despite youth making up 10% of California's homeless population on any given night over the past 5 years on average. So one of the projects, the city of El Centro set up housing for college students experiencing homelessness, which included priority for current and former foster youth experiencing homelessness in college. And next, you'll hear more from the Riverside County project. We were thrilled to see these projects move forward in the first year of Homekey. And you know, one thing to note about these 94 projects, again, as Simone said, no project applicants were turned away. So it wasn't that someone applied for a youth project and it wasn't competitive enough. It was just all the youth projects that were applied for actually did get funded. So is Homekey a good fit? Absolutely. And you'll hear more about that next. And as someone mentioned, you know, some jurisdictions put forward multiple applications, or their applications funded multiple buildings or multiple scattered site housing. So, you know, for transitional housing providers, or the kind of working under a different model with scattered site apartments. One property that was purchased was a dorm that was turned into senior housing for the elderly. Obviously, that a dorm is an appropriate use setting. There's a lot of options here. Some commercial buildings were turned into apartment buildings and rehab that way. Some multifamily housing units were built on land. So duplexes for college students, things like that. There's a lot of options out there under the new uses that Simone shared with you. So next slide, please. So I am so thrilled to introduce you to our next presenter. Gabriel Maldonado founded True Evolution and has led the organization's efforts as the CEO for the last 11 years. And Gabe is a former member of the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS under President Obama and serves on several boards. Gabe was raised in Compton and is firmly rooted in advancing the quality of life and human dignity of people of color in the LGBTQ experience. Gabe, welcome, and please take it away. Tell us about how you accomplished this last year, and I'm so excited to learn from you this morning.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you all inviting me into this space. And I want to first welcome in my colleague and co-partner, co-captain on this project, Mike Walsh, Deputy Director of the Housing Authority for Riverside County. So Mike, before I start, I don't know if there's any opening comments you want to give or anything you want to say to set the space. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Yeah. So Gabe, I made you a co-host. I'm hoping that gives you the power to share. Okay.
Yes, I think it's prompting you. There you go. Perfect. All right. Can everyone see my screen okay? Please tell me if it's the correct screen. Okay, at any point that it's not, you let me know, because that's known to happen in Zoom trip-up errors. So again, my name is Gabe Maldonado. I'm the founder and CEO of True Evolution. We are a Project Homekey grantee. And the name of our project is called Project Legacy. It is a community campus, and I'm going to share a little bit about why we're referring to it as a community campus. Let me also put on my timer. I don't talk your ears off forever. So a little bit about us, our background. Our mission is to fight for health equity and racial justice to advance the quality of life and human dignity of LGBTQ people. So the two big takeaway words that I always say folks to take away is health equity and racial justice. That is sort of the root of what we come out of. But in addition to being a social justice organization, we are a direct service provider. We are a clinical provider. And so we have a collective vision of becoming a center of excellence for addressing key social determinants of health. Housing is one of those pillars in our social determinants that we seek to address. So that's the vision for the organization. A little bit about us very briefly. We're celebrating 14 years. We're headquartered in the city of Riverside. We serve both Riverside and San Bernardino County. This particular project is in the city of Riverside. You'll see our priority populations are LGBTQ, people living with HIV, TAY-aged youth between 18 and 25, and transitioning foster care youth. As you can imagine, these populations overlap, and you'll see that in the makeup of the population we hope to serve. Some of our direct services and programs, as I mentioned, we are a direct service provider. So it's HIV is very much our bailiwick. So STDs, communicable and infectious diseases, including COVID, which is a part of our response work. We have a mental health clinic. We have case management services. We offer emergency supportive housing, which includes motel and hotel emergency vouchers, as well as first and last month's rent, bridge assistance for deposits, et cetera. We had 11 employees. We're at 19 and we're about to be at 23. And this is definitely because of Homekey. So anyone wanting to be an actual applicant, get ready to scale up because you will need it. You'll need the support. I love to show my team. We are very proudly an all organization of color, and I love being able to employ Black, Brown, and Asian and Pacific Islanders to my team. And so this is my kids. These are my youngins. I love them, and we have more people to come. So the actual project itself, we are located in downtown Riverside. You'll see here our current offices is in the middle of this map. And the proposed project site is just 2 blocks away from the current project. You'll see in the legend in the top left corner, the location of the project is very much central to all major social, city, local municipal services, including a library, which is 2 blocks away, the community college, the local university. They're all within both either walking, bike ride, or less than a 10-minute trolley ride up University Avenue. It's near food halls, it's near all of the governmental buildings, it's next to the DMV. So it's very centrally located to certain social services, which I know for a lot of the providers on this call, that is also important to you all to ensure that your project is located in not an area that is geographically or economically isolated from your population's needs. So we're very happy that we were able to get our site here next to where our home has always been. Yes, by the way, if anyone asks, I will be providing all these slides. They will be sent out, and feel free to ask any questions in the chat box and I can answer them at the end. Simone can facilitate, so appreciate that to everyone. So this is our project. It was purchased at 3.5 million. If you notice here, it is 6 individual parcel sites. So this is a collection of properties. So all of these properties just coincidentally happen to have been owned by the same owner. And this owner was selling all 6 of them, either separately as individual sites, or it could have been purchased as we purchased it as a collection. So we decided to purchase 5 residential properties, which is located here under parcel 1, parcel 3, parcel 4, parcel 5, and parcel 6. And then there is a commercial building that is parcel number 2, which we're turning into our community center and our headquarters. So these are all of the different properties that were purchased in our Homekey acquisition. And the money that we were given for the project was primarily for acquisition. So what are we turning it into? What's the vision? Is that we will have a permanent supportive housing program that will be program-based. That's going to be important for you all to determine, and I'll talk about that later, whether your program is going to be grant facility funded, meaning it's a facility, you're not charging people rent. This is similar to like a homeless shelter or a group home transitional facility. Or is it going to be affordable housing? where it is rent based and you may have to utilize things like tax credits for the purposes of the build. So that will make a determining factor, and you should determine that before you even apply to Homekey. This is a program for us, so the entire facility is covered by grants. So the length of the program by which individuals will come in, and the goal would be to rehabilitate and reorganize and reprioritize their lives in such a way that they will be on a path to home ownership or be on a path to market leveled rent like the rest of us in expensive California, and that they would be able to achieve that sort of market leveled rent like the rest of us do. Our project will have 23 units. It'll accommodate a total of 49 beds. And this is the population makeup that we hope to accommodate throughout the residences. It will be 80% LGBTQ. The facility will be primarily for people living with HIV, which is a big population we service. And then for 25%, those who are at highest risk. This may be those that are in our transgender community. These are certainly folks that are in our youngest of age group. These may be individuals experiencing challenges around substance use. So we really want to look at those who are at highest risk for certain comorbidities. 25%, one of the residences will be reserved for seniors, and 75% of the facility will be for Tay-aged youth between 18 and 25. These are a few of the services we plan to offer. So it will be a wraparound site that will offer multiple services in one location. I can go into this further in another conversation. And then this is the vision for what we hope to create. We'll be merging all of the property lines and creating a unified campus. And this campus, here are some visuals of the community center, the insides. But this is the parking lot that's being turned into about 10,000 square feet. 10,000 square feet of open recreational park space. I see some questions coming in. I'll get to those questions at the end for sure. And we also hope that the facility will be able to accommodate an on-site fitness center, outdoor showers for some of our homeless that won't be able to be residents. So making sure that all of our client population, not just the residences, can access services here, as well as outdoor laundry facility that will be available to all of our residents and non-resident homeless clients. Some other images. So I was asked to put together just some things that you all would take away, some things that would be important to note down early on before your application process begins. And so I call them 8 teachable moments, and I refer to them as teachable moments because each of these sort of 8 recommendations that I've listed each came with a very particular episode or an incident of trauma or some sort of misstep or something that we had to recourse correct, a learning lesson, you know? And so I wanted to pull out each of those things that created a scenario where we had to learn, grow, evolve, make decisions, have infrastructure in place. And these were sort of the 8 that I pulled out. So the first one that I listed was have a vision. And have a vision is really understanding what population you're going to serve. What do you want your physical space to look like? A lot of the questions that are in the Project Homekey application really pertain to like your design and how it's going to look and what the structure is going to look like. There's also a huge emphasis on impact. You know, they're not just giving you money to build housing. They're giving you money to house people. So they want to know not only what the design and the physical infrastructure and what the layout, where the location is of your project, but how are you going to operate it? How are you going to render services? How are you going to have programs on site? And I would say that in our Project Homekey cohort meetings, which are cohort meetings with all the Homekey recipients, that is actually the #1 challenge that most of the providers are having, is how do we get our heads wrapped around all of the many social services, all of the many supportive services that need to take place. And sometimes there are challenges when there are too many, you know, cooks in the kitchen, there's too many partners in a project. And how do you streamline, unify, create a unified operating procedure for running the facility, whether that could be you taking on both the development role and the operating role, or you bringing in outside partners for the operating. So really having a full comprehensive vision for the population, the physical space, and the impact you want to have. Pick a path. So this is something that we could go into for an hour, to be honest with you, but really it's focusing on, do you all see yourselves as being the developer, meaning you're going to take responsibility for the actual construction of the site? Are you going to serve as a co-applicant partner, meaning you are actually listed in the application, you're actually written in acknowledged by HCD, but you're going to take on a specific role like just the operating. Now that may be some people's instinct to just do that because I don't do development, I don't know about development, we're just going to get a partner. There are wider implications with being a co-applicant on Project Homekey, whether you choose to take on being a developer or not. Many of the compliance requirements, many of the disclosures, potential FOIA requests that you're going to get on things like your prevailing wages for your construction worker, or whether you're meeting trade and skilled labor requirements for labor compliance under the contract. All of these will be the responsibility of the both applicants. So even if you are not the developer, I would highly advise any nonprofit that is serving as a co-applicant, you need to build your team, and that's number 3. And part of building your team is also having some in-house compliance managers that you can ensure that your agency as a co-applicant is covered in risk and liability. So it really isn't as simple as just saying, I'm going to get a developer and they're going to take on all that. There are some wider implications that you will be responsible for simply being as a co-applicant. And we've already run into many of those. And so building your team is important. And if I could build it into 3 categories, it would be pre-development. That's your architect, that's your general contractors, that's all the folks that are going to help you build the actual design element of your application. So those are your pre-development team. You need to have your general contractors. I don't think it would have been possible for us to even complete the Project Homekey application if we did not have a general contractor who was already serving as a consultancy. You don't have to make that GC your actual general contractor that you're going to use. But I would highly advise having a general contractor already a part of the project to at least consult you. That is something that I think it would be really important. Let me back up. I have a list of our project partners here to give you all some ideas on partners. And I had mentioned about having in-house managers. We have a team of 3, now a team of 5 of people who are in-house managers, and their primary role and responsibility is for them to have oversight over all of the regulatory, statutory, and compliance requirements that we have on the project. True Evolution is the developer and the operator, so we do serve as both the owners and the operators on the project. We are responsible from the whole thing, from beginning to end, design, concept, construction, and post operations. So all of these individuals all report to our organization. If you had a partner who is a housing developer, there's a large number of these team members who would more than likely report directly to your developer. But I would highly recommend that if there is a 501c3 nonprofit that is a part of this project and you're going to be taking on the operating, I would highly ensure that you have in-house managers as well, helping you to keep track of all of the requirements, the compliance requirements. I put check under the hood, and that's because when you apply for Project Homekey, they give you 3 months to put together your budget. The budget you start with is nowhere near the budget you're going to end with. The cost of raw materials, the cost of labor, it is absolutely going to skyrocket your budget from 0 to 100 like that. From the time that you do your due diligence on planning to the time that you actually complete, the budget can go up dramatically, particularly when housing developers have to meet some of the labor requirements. The labor requirements actually drew up our costs by about 50%. We went up 50% in budget costs simply because of the labor and compliance regulatory requirements. So checking under the hood of your property, seeing exactly what some of the pitfalls are. Ours was our foundations. We have to redo all of the foundations to be earthquake seismic grade. That is nearly $1 million of an unanticipated expense that we did not know prior to looking under the hood. And because the Homekey application is so quick, you really kind of got to look under the hood. And you may already have projects that you already want to fund. So you may be able to skip that step if you already have a property identified. Know the rules. This is really important. And I broke down knowing the rules into 3 buckets. So the first bucket is the funding. So part of the funding that we are getting that's going to go towards the construction is HOPWA, which is Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS, and HAP, Housing Homelessness and Assistance Prevention Program. These are terms that I'm sure almost everybody on this call knows. You know these programs better than me. So when you're using both HAP and HOPWA funding for construction, there are going to be specific requirements on how the construction process needs to operate, how much you pay people, what kind of contractors you can use, when you can begin construction. There are some regulatory procedures before you can even begin construction when you're using those funding, things like environmental surveys, archaeological studies. So knowing the rules of the funding is really important. Then there's your local municipal permits. Now, something that everybody here needs to write down is AB 83. AB 83. It is an accompanying piece of legislation that the legislators passed in December of 2020, and it essentially waives all of local municipal entitlements process for all Project Homekey recipients. It's sort of your magic wand that you can carry into the city. Now, that magic wand has limitations. So while the normal planning process is waived, so certain elements of your local municipal process will be overlooked, you still are subjected to the building and safety permits and the building and safety requirements. And so that can very much put a huge log jam on your process. And then the last one is your labor. So how you're paid for your labor. How am I on time, Simone? I just have 3 more and then I'm done.
We are reaching time right now, but I do want to get in at least one kind of juicy question that I think has kind of encompasses some of the others. So you want to take a minute to kind of summarize your last few points and then we can jump to a question? Is that okay?
Absolutely. I warned Simone that this is really like a 2-hour review. I warned her. So get your money. Acquisition, pre-development, the build and operating, those are just the 4 basic components that you're going to need to fundraise for. Not all of it will be paid for by Homekey. Build it. So these are just some of the big bucket people that I think are great to have on your team. And then lastly, be ready for when they come. So your Project Homekey application is also going to ask for you to demonstrate your ability to operate the facility and your ability to not only finance it, but your ability to provide programs and services. So that would be the final piece. And those are the 8 teachable moments.
Thank you. And, we're, just so everyone knows, we are actively kind of talking with Gabe about how can we stay in contact with Gabe to continue to kind of just draw knowledge, all the wisdom that he's gained from this process that he has, and spread it. So we'll to be continued there. But let's dive into a question. What degree of site control is needed to apply, and how did you get that? Did you have to put down a deposit, get into some purchase agreement, then apply for Homekey to pay for it? Or what did that look like? Where did early funding come from? And what was the scope of the early agreement? So if you can just kind of speak on that for a few minutes, thanks.
Yeah, 2 things that you're going to need in order to apply as it relates to site control. One is you're going to need access to the site in order to answer questions that Homekey application is going to ask you. Particularly in building your budget, you're not going to be able to know what you need to rehab your site if you don't have physical access to it. So when we were looking at the property, we did not own it, nor was it in escrow. And the owners of the property allowed us to do some limited amount of due diligence and site visits. There did reach a point where my general contractors, our inspectors, our architects said, we cannot move forward on this unless we have total access to the project, to the site. And so what we did was we did take a small loan, and part of it came from our reserves, and part of it came from Riverside County Housing Authority's nonprofit division, who did provide us a loan to put the property into escrow. Once we put the property into escrow, which completing escrow is a requirement of Homekey, that is one of your milestones, is you have to actually fulfill close escrow within, I think it's like 60 to 90 days or something. You have to have escrow closed. And so once we were funded under Homekey, we did repay back that loan to Riverside County's nonprofit division, and that's what allowed us to gain site control. The other aspect of it is that we did have to pull money from our own reserves in order to pay many of the consultants to help us put the application together. There's going to be entitlements experts, compliance experts who are all going to be needed to contribute to the application. And so we did have to pull money from our reserves in order to pay for that portion of the application.
Thank you so much, Gabe. A lot of people are saying thank you for this wonderful presentation. They're excited about your project. And like I said, we are now friends with Gabe and Michael. We are going to stay in contact with them and figure out how we can continue to have this conversation. Because I know we didn't even scratch the surface today.
Yeah, sorry if it took up too much. It's a lot, so I apologize.
It's a lot, yeah. No, don't apologize. We just appreciate you guys being here today. So now we are going to move into just talking to Michael Walsh, who is on the county, the eligible applicant side of things. You know, Michael is from the county of Riverside with the Housing Authority, and you know, was the actual applicant of Homekey, and he is the deputy director of the Housing Authority. So he's generously volunteered some of his time here to answer some questions. Let us pick his brain. So one question, Michael, is what do you look for in an organization when you're considering a Homekey project co-applicant?
I think the big thing for us is we're looking at is like a past track record of performance. It doesn't necessarily have to be a past track record of performance in the operating of the facility as constructed, but True Evolution has been a partner of the county for come on 10 years as part of the HOPA program, where they were providing emergency assistance to people, placing them in hotels. And so it was almost a natural transition for us, like basically, okay, you've been doing this sort of thing and we've been paying other people hotels, like, and you're doing all this work. How do we bring it into this piece? And we would, but for groups that don't necessarily have that level of experience or expertise, we would, but they have a vision or those sort of pieces, we would look to try and connect them with other folks or other sort of people that may have more of that housing background to move them in. It also depends on the type of project. Gabe's project was smaller in size and those sort of things. That wasn't necessarily a traditional low-income housing tax credit project or those sort of things. If it was moved in that layer of expertise or was a bigger size project, we probably would have recommended for True Evolution to partner with a traditional affordable housing developer.
Thank you. The next question is a youth serving organization who has no experience in housing development going to be a competitive co-applicant in the eyes of a public entity like yours? And I'll change that a little bit to say competitive co-applicant or non-applicant partner. So it's just a partner on the project in the eyes of a public entity.
So if there is no experience in housing operations, development, and all of those pieces, you're going to have to find a buddy. Have to find someone else to come in there. Gabe didn't share this, but he was partnering with a group out of Los Angeles that also helped in terms of the operation and try to provide some of that, helping develop the budget, help with ongoing operations and all those sort of things. And those are all sort of pieces that we would look to use or any sort of applicant. Like, what is your track record? If you don't have a track record of operating a facility, who are you going to work with that has expertise? Because I would say is the nonprofits are all really good-hearted people, and that's why people are into this. And oftentimes, being the owner or the having to run the project or like follow the rules, sometimes to keep the project running, you necessarily maybe have to step outside of what your usual comfort level is. And I think having someone with that level of expertise is really key as you're moving forward.
Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today, Michael. We're going to stop there. And thanks again to Gabe and Michael just for taking the time to join us today. And we'll be in touch. I'm now going to pass it over to our director, Amy Lemley, and she's going to take us home all the way up until Q&A to talk a little bit about what are you all on the call going to do starting today or tomorrow or next week.
Thank you very much, Simone, and just want to share in thanking our special guest today. It is a lot to take in. Maybe you can be like, but I really want to emphasize we had a much longer conversation with both Mike and Gabe, and they did it, and we believe others can too. And so there is a very exciting project they're engaged in. And next, we just want to really talk about what all of you out there can do to utilize this very, again, really potentially once in a lifetime funding. It's hard to overstate how important this funding is, particularly for entities that maybe have a little bit less experience. As Simone said, last year, all projects were funded, and this is even more funding this year. So what is next to do? We want you to reach out and engage with a number of different entities. The first is, at the top of that, is potentially think about reaching out to your most loyal, dedicated funder and say, wow, there's this tremendous opportunity. Could we potentially get a planning grant? If your organization's like our organization, we're all working very hard and our plate is more than full. And without a little bit of extra wiggle room support, it's hard to know how to even think about a project like this. But what would be more exciting for your most dedicated long-term funder than to know that your organization is going to capitalize on this tremendous opportunity? So, we'd really just encourage you to do that, get a little bit of extra money for consulting, so that you can get the support you need, and not just to say, we're overwhelmed, we're going to pass on this, because this kind of opportunity is not going to come around again anytime soon. We have this year and we have next year, but after that, the pandemic has been tragic, but this large investment is one bright spot from it. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that next little cog is finding the Mike Walshes of California, these wonderful, dedicated, public officials who are working in cities, counties, and public housing authorities, to reach out to them and find them, and to find out, here's some questions to ask. Are there existing projects underway? Do they know about the youth set aside? Do they know that including youth in their projects could make their projects more competitive? Now, we don't know, the NOFA hasn't been released, so we don't know exactly how they're going to structure that, like whether it will be more points or maybe they'll get a priority period of application. But we know that is a legal requirement. We know HCD is thinking about those things right now. But the time is now to reach out to those local public entities, and start to have those conversations and start to think about how they can include youth in the projects that they're considering. And the third is a housing developer. So, it's a lot to go from being a full service provider to do housing development. And some organizations are ready to make that leap, and excited to do that. Others may not be at that place. And so a way of proceeding, and Gabe referred to this in his steps, is thinking, do I want to partner with that nonprofit housing developer? And so we'd really encourage those of you who maybe aren't ready to take that leap to become, or that step. It's not a leap. It's a great opportunity. So if you are, that's one way to proceed. Another way is to really partner with that nonprofit housing developer, reaching out to them. Do they have plans for the next round of Homekey? Do they know about the youth set aside? Or do they know about potential properties or parcels that might be something to consider? So next slide, please. So in order to kind of make those connections, we do have a number of rosters for you. That first one is a roster of all of the housing contacts at the county level. And this was developed for HAP, but this is a great individuals to reach out to begin to have that conversations. We don't have a city roster yet, but we do also have a public housing authority roster. And so don't be shy. I mean, the reality is it's a very disaggregated process. And for those of us who are used to working kind of more in the child welfare space, where there's 58 counties and everything is driven through that administrative entity, sometimes this can feel overwhelming because it's a lot more diffuse than that. But we all know from serving young people that getting on the phone, making calls, trying to make connections, it all really begins with that. And so these are the three groups that we really want to encourage you to start to make contact with. Next slide, please. Then we also have housing developers, as I said it previously. And so we have developed a list of affordable housing developers in California. Now, there's a lot of affordable housing developers. Not all of them, as we've come to learn, focus on the issue of homelessness. They do a lot of different things. Some of them do workforce housing or only senior housing. And the roster that we put together, we're trying to hone in on the ones who do this kind of work. And so on the roster, you'll see the county or counties where they're located, the website, a phone number. And then on that far left-hand column is whether they were involved in a 2020 Homekey funded project. And so those are really the developers who have done this, who have walked this walk. And so they're in a very strong position to come back with another application. Next slide, please. So then another great way to start is to really look at last year's funded projects. And so on that link on the slide, you can look at those projects. You can see what jurisdictions put in for how many projects, what the size of them were, who the partners were, and see if your jurisdiction has submitted, and try and get connected to the people who were part of that. I mean, they're the ones who are the most knowledgeable of this process and what it takes. And they're probably the people who are starting to think about what is going to be submitted for the next round of Homekey. So really encourage you to kind of visit that group of organizations. Next slide, please. Now, if you do all that and you run up short and you're saying, you know, I still can't find anybody to talk to, we want to help. And so we want you to follow this link, and we want to do a little matchmaking service together with Housing California that is generously offered to help us make some of these introductions. If you're having a hard time finding someone who's responding, or maybe you're kind of not using the language that they recognize, please let us know, because we want to make a connection between your youth serving organizations and nonprofit developers with the goal of hopefully making a successful project. So next slide. So that's a lot about the next steps. Do I stop here, Simone?
No, I actually didn't need to come back on screen.
Oh,
Go
no,
ahead.
that's okay. I just wanted to make sure I was sorry about that. Another really important next step is to get ready for the NOFA. So what we're doing today is kind of a pre-NOFA conversation. You know, HCD is busy working at lightning speed, you know, getting this NOFA ready. It's extremely impressive given that the budget just passed last month. They are required and will have that NOFA out next month. So make sure you are on the list to get it. And so on the slide here, if you go to that link, click on that little box and stay directly connected. You can definitely count on us to write about this in our newsletter and to offer kind of informational conversations like the one we're having, but nothing substitutes getting the information directly. And so we really encourage that. We also encourage, you know, once you find that public entity, to sign up for a pre-application consultation. Have your public entity sign up for that. And that is a really neat service that they're providing, where you're actually able to get together with HCD and the public entity. And to, you know, as you can see, each project is very unique. The financing is unique. The target population is unique. But this is something HCD does because they want these applications to be successful. And then also just send your questions directly to HCD at the email below. And, you know, they have the capacity to address those, so don't be shy. One other thing is on the timing regarding the NOFA is last year, there was a stakeholder call on the same day that the NOFA was released and a webinar the week later. So really and we'll make sure to, everyone who registered for this conversation, we'll make sure to kind of send that out so you don't miss it. But we just wanted to say that the timing on this is very quick, and we don't want anyone to miss any of that information. So that is just a heads up that is going to happen. Last step in terms of next steps is this is a lot of information. I formerly, you know, ran a youth housing organization, and if I were sitting and someone were laying all this on me, I'd be like, I just don't know if this is possible. The good news is There's one round of Homekey, and then there's going to be another round of Homekey. So if you don't feel like, if this is feeling maybe more than you can do right now, we really want to encourage you to use the time now to prepare for the next round. Start that conversation, conduct that outreach, because again, fortunately, it's going to be dispersed over 2 years, and it may be possible next year to participate. All right, back to Simone.
Thank you, Amy. Well, this is kind of the end of a formal presentation. We did include just a couple slides on additional funding opportunities. I won't go over them because today we're really talking about Homekey, but we will send these slides out. It's HAP and YE, 2 opportunities to fund programs for youth homelessness. So read those when you get the PowerPoint. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out. I just want to let people know we are providing some technical assistance, helping people match with partners and some other kind of generalized assistance regarding Homekey and HAP. And we are providing that TA really statewide, but we do have funding from generous support from Tipping Point community to provide a little more in-depth support to 5 Bay Area organizations in 5 Bay Area counties. And you can click on the link on the screen there to get more information, but where we can pair the TA with some a planning grant of up to $10,000. So if you're interested in that and you're in one of the Alameda, Contra Costa, San Francisco, Santa Clara, what's the 5th one I'm missing, guys? San Mateo counties, please do reach out and click the URL for more info. I want to move us into Q&A. I know we have just a couple minutes left, but we are so fortunate that Gabe, if you've noticed in the Q&A panel, folks, he's gone in and answered a bunch of these questions just based on his experience in running this last year. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select a few of these and read them out loud. I don't know if everyone is able to follow the Q&A that he's responding to. But one question is, did you have the site identified before applying for the grant? He said, yes, you need to have a site identified in order to apply. Now, that doesn't mean you need to have a site identified to go to a public entity necessarily and talk about your project or to go to a developer. You could see if there are existing sites that you can join that they've already started making plans on. Perhaps you can join that site and add use to the project. So it doesn't mean that you need to have your site identified yesterday before you go talk to people, but to formally apply for Homekey, you do. So another question was, here we go. Are you allowed to acquire already established buildings, such as apartment complexes, through Homekey to transition them to transitional housing for TAY populations? Gabe said that's exactly what we did, find a building that's as ready to go as possible. So yes, the answer is yes. Someone asked, can you talk more about your partnership with the Housing Authority? What does that relationship look like? Gabe said, woo, it's layered. The Housing Authority of Riverside County is amazing. They help provide us small bridge funds for capacity building. They provide technical assistance and advice. However, the county did tell us that we were responsible for the entire project. That means financing, construction, and operating. So they've been advisors and early investors with bridge money. Let's get one more question in here. Advice on how a CBO partner can encourage their city or county to apply and name a CBO as a co-applicant. I think that's a great question. And I think many of you on the call are maybe thinking that and planning on doing that. So Gabe said, find an ally. You need to find the Mike Walsh of your county. The investment on the county side is significant. You would need to have a champion that sees a collective vision. A starting place would be to identify what projects does the county already have in motion. They always do. And if you can find a population priority or a region of interest that the county already has an interest in, that may be a great conversation starter. But find any ally who shares your vision is his advice. So thank you so much. We're at noon. Hindsight, this maybe could have been a longer call, and we'll see what more we can offer to continue this conversation. We're thrilled that there's interest in this program, and we obviously want to see as much of this funding go to programs and projects that are involving youth as possible. So please don't be shy. Reach out. I think me and Anna's email addresses on the screen there. reach out to us and let us know what your plans are. Let us know if you have questions. And we want to continue to stay abreast of what's being planned across the state and help in any way we can. So again, Amy mentioned that form earlier. If you can't find a developer, fill out that form and we'll work with Housing California to try to get you matched. Other than that, I think Amy or Anna, Gabe or Michael, is there anything else anyone wants to add before we close today?
Thank you for having me.
No, I would just say let's be creative. Let's do what we do best in serving youth and work together to put forward some amazing projects. And thanks to our partners in Riverside for lifting up their amazing work. So excited to see that serving people and connecting.
Thank you all. And Gabe mentioned to find the Mike Walsh. You have to find for the jurisdictions on the call. You have to find your own Gabe Maldonado and True Evolution in your communities, because I know they're out there and they're great people like Gabe. So gotta find him. Well.
Thank you. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.